The hospital ship HMS Healing Light moved slowly through space like a white bird with its wings spread wide. Red crosses painted on its sides could be seen from very far away. Anyone looking at the ship would know right away what it was. This was a place of healing, not fighting. Captain Lisa Morgan walked through the clean white hallways of her ship. She had been in command for 3 years now. Her crew of 847 doctors, nurses, and medics came from Earth and worked together to save lives. They did not care what planet someone came from or what they looked like. Pain was the same everywhere in the galaxy. The ship carried 2,000 patients in its medical bays. Some were soldiers who had been hurt in the war between different worlds. Others were refugees who had run away from their homes when the fighting came too close. There were humans with broken bones, blue-skinned Altarians with plasma burns, and even a few of the rock-like granite people who had been caught in an explosion. Dr. Alex Carter finished washing his hands after a long surgery. He was tired, but happy. The young Altarian soldier on his table would live to see his family again. The boy had been shot 3 times while helping children escape from a burning city. Now his wounds were closed and healing. Alex dried his hands and looked out through the small window in the operating room. Stars filled the darkness like tiny diamonds. Somewhere out there, ships were still fighting and people were still dying. But here on the Healing Light, there was only peace and the quiet work of making people well again. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks was in the engine room, checking the power systems. The hospital ship was not fast or strong like a warship. It was built to be safe and comfortable for sick people. The engines hummed softly, pushing them through the Kepler system toward their next stop. They would pick up more wounded from a battle that had happened 2 days ago. Danny wiped oil from his hands with a dirty cloth. He had joined the crew because his brother had been killed in the first year of the war. He could not bring his brother back, but he could help keep this ship running so it could save other people's brothers and sisters. Nurse Amy Rodriguez walked between the beds in Medical Bay 3. She stopped to check on each patient and make sure they had what they needed. An old human woman with gray hair asked for water. Amy brought her a cup and helped her drink. A young man from the mining world of Kepler 7 needed his bandages changed. Amy worked carefully so it would not hurt. The patients came from many different worlds, but Amy treated them all the same way. Her own son was fighting in the war somewhere on the other side of the galaxy. She had not heard from him in 6 months. Taking care of these wounded people helped her feel like she was taking care of him too. Captain Morgan reached the bridge and sat in her chair. The Healing Light was moving through a neutral zone where no fighting was allowed. All the different sides in the war had agreed that medical ships could travel safely through this area. It was one of the few places left where the rules of civilized behavior still mattered. Lieutenant Bill Harris was watching the sensor screens. Everything looked normal. A few cargo ships were moving through the system, and far away they could see the lights of a space station. The war felt very distant from here. "Captain, we are getting a message from the refugee camp on Kepler 4, said Communications Officer Jane Foster. They have 200 more wounded ready for pickup. Set course for Kepler 4, Morgan said. Tell them, we will be there in 6 hours. The Healing Light changed direction slowly. Its engines were not powerful, but they were quiet and smooth. Sick people needed rest, not the rough shaking that came from military engines in the children's ward. Dr. Susan Lee was reading a story to a group of young patients. They came from 4 different worlds and spoke 3 different languages, but they all understood the pictures in the book. A little human girl with a broken arm sat next to a young Altarian boy who had lost his parents. They were holding hands and laughing at the funny pictures. Dr. Lee had been a children's doctor on Earth before the war started. When she heard about the hospital ships, she knew she had to help. These children had seen terrible things. Some had watched their homes burn, others had been separated from their families, but here they could be children again, at least for a little while. The Healing Light continued on its path through the peaceful stars. In the medical bays, doctors worked to save lives. In the recovery rooms, nurses helped people get stronger. In the children's ward, teachers helped young minds heal from the terrible things they had seen. Captain Morgan looked at the star charts on her screen. In 2 days, they would reach the edge of human space. There they would drop off the patients, who were well enough to go home and pick up supplies for their next mission. The work never ended, but Morgan did not mind. Every life they saved made the galaxy a little bit better. Lieutenant Harris was still watching his sensors when something made him look twice at the screen. 3 ships had just appeared at the edge of the system. They were too far away to see clearly, but they were big and moving fast. "Captain, I have 3 contacts on long-range sensors," Harris said. "They just dropped out of hyperspace." Morgan looked at the tactical display. The 3 ships were heading straight toward them. "Can you identify them?" Harris worked at his controls for a moment. "I am getting ship signatures now. They are Zephyrian destroyers." A cold feeling went through Morgan's stomach. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty. They did not follow the rules of war that other civilized worlds had agreed to. They attacked anyone they thought was weak. "Are they responding to our identification signals?" Morgan asked. Communications Officer Foster tried several times too. "Contact the approaching ships." "No response, Captain. They're not acknowledging our medical status." The 3 dark ships came closer. Their hulls were painted black with red markings that looked like claws. These were ships built for war and destruction, at no place in a neutral zone where medical ships traveled. Morgan felt her heart beating faster. The healing light had no weapons and no shields. It was completely helpless against even one warship, and now 3 of them were approaching. She had to believe that even the Zephyrians would not attack a clearly marked hospital. "Ship. Send them our medical certification codes," she ordered. "Make sure they know we are carrying wounded from all sides of the conflict." Foster sent the message, but there was still no response from the Zephyrian ships. They kept coming closer, their weapons clearly visible on their dark hulls. Dr. Carter felt the change in the ship's movement and came to the bridge. "Is everything okay, Captain?" Morgan did not want to worry him, but she could not lie. "We have 3 Zephyrian destroyers approaching. They are not responding to our communications." Carter looked at the tactical screen, and his face went pale. He had heard the stories about what Zephyrians did to prisoners. "What do we do?" "We follow the rules," Morgan said firmly. "We are a medical ship in a neutral zone. They have no legal right to interfere with us." But even as she said it, Morgan knew that legal rights meant nothing to the Zephyrians. They followed only one law: the strong take what they want from the weak. The 3 destroyers were close enough now that their individual shapes could be seen. The lead ship was larger than the others, with more weapons. This was a command vessel, which meant an important Zephyrian leader was aboard. Lieutenant Harris checked his sensors again. "Captain, they are powering up their weapon systems." The attack had lasted only 20 minutes, but it changed everything. Warprime Kethix had given his orders with cold precision. First, they disabled the engines so the hospital ship could not run away. Then they targeted the medical bays where the wounded lay helpless in their beds. Finally, they hunted down the escape pods one by one, destroying them like a cat playing with mice. Captain Lisa Morgan had watched from her command chair as her beautiful white ship died around her. The explosions tore through the corridors where she had walked every day for 3 years. Medical bays where her crew had saved thousands of lives became graves filled with smoke and fire. She had sent the distress signal just before the communications array exploded in a shower of sparks. Dr. Alex Carter had tried to save as many patients as he could. He and Nurse Amy Rodriguez had carried wounded people to the escape pods, but there were too many and not enough time. The ship was breaking apart, and the artificial gravity was failing. People floated in the hallways, some already dead, others crying for help that would never come. In the end, only 127 humans survived. A merchant ship found them drifting in space 2 days later, half dead from cold and lack of oxygen. The rescue ship's captain was an old trader named Pete Williams, who had been hauling cargo between the outer worlds for 30 years. When he saw the wreckage of the hospital ship scattered across space, he cried like a child. Captain Morgan had been unconscious for 3 days after the rescue. When she woke up in the medical bay of the merchant ship, the first thing she asked about was her crew. Pete Williams sat beside her bed and told her the truth as gently as he could. 720 people had died on the healing light. Most of them had been doctors. nurses, and medics who had chosen to spend their lives helping others. The news of the attack spread through human space like fire, through dry grass. People were angry in a way they had never been angry before. The Zephyrians had not just attacked a military target or destroyed a city. They had murdered healers and patients who lay defenseless in their beds. They had broken every rule that civilized beings were supposed to follow, but nowhere was the anger stronger than on the fortress world of New Geneva. In a room deep underground where Admiral Jake Sullivan sat at his desk reading the distress beacon data for the 5th time. The recording was short and full of static, but it told the whole terrible story. Captain Morgan's voice, calm even as her ship died around her, requesting immediate assistance for wounded civilians and medical personnel under attack by hostile forces. Admiral Sullivan was 52 years old and had been fighting wars since he was 18. He had commanded fleets in 12 major battles and won them all. Other admirals called him the Ghost Admiral because his tactics were so strange that enemy commanders never knew what he would do next. His ships would appear where they could, not possibly be and disappear before the enemy could react, but those who knew. Sullivan personally understood that his greatest weapon was not his ships or his guns. It was his mind. He could see patterns that other people missed and find solutions to problems that seemed impossible to solve. He had read every book ever written about war and studied every battle that had ever been fought. Most importantly, he never forgot that war was about people, not machines. Sullivan's aide, Commander Ryan Phillips, knocked on the office door and entered without waiting for permission. He had worked with the Admiral for 8 years and knew that his commander was thinking about something important when he got very quiet and very still. "The survivors from the Healing Light have arrived on New Geneva," Phillips reported. "Captain, Morgan is requesting permission to address the War Council." Sullivan looked up from the datapad in his hands. His gray eyes were cold as winter stars. "Bring her to Conference Room 7 in 1 hour. I want the full council there, including intelligence and logistics." Phillips nodded and turned to go, but Sullivan's voice stopped him at the door. "Ryan, I want you to pull the files on every Zephyrian military leader. Their backgrounds, their families, their fears, everything we have. Also get me detailed maps of all their supply routes and communication networks." Phillips felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen that look in Sullivan's eyes only twice before, and both times entire enemy fleets had simply vanished from space. "Yes, sir. Should I tell the council what this is about?" "Tell him we are going to discuss the future of the Zephyrian Empire," Sullivan said quietly. "What little future they have left." An hour later, Captain Lisa Morgan stood at the head of a long table surrounded by the most powerful military leaders in human space. Her uniform was new because her old one had been destroyed with her ship, but her face still showed the pain of what she had lived through. Her left arm was in a cast where a piece of metal had broken it during the attack. Dr. Alina Hayes Sullivan Z's, Chief Intelligence Officer, sat at the far end of the table with her computer open in front of her. She had been analyzing Zephyrian behavior patterns for 3 years and knew more about their culture than any other human alive. What she had learned made her sick to her stomach, but it also gave her ideas about how to hurt them. "Captain Morgan," Admiral Sullivan said in a voice that was perfectly calm and polite, "please, tell us what happened to your ship." Morgan's report took 20 minutes. She spoke in a clear, steady voice and gave every detail she could remember. She described how the Zephyrians had ignored all attempts at communication and had targeted the medical bays first. She told them about the escape pods being hunted down and destroyed, about the patients who had died in their beds, about the children who had been killed while their parents watched helplessly. When she finished, the room was completely silent. Some of the officers were staring at their hands. Others had tears in their eyes. General Frank Davis, who commanded the Marine Forces, looked like he wanted to punch something. "How many Zephyrian ships were involved?" Sullivan asked. 3 destroyers. "Sir, the lead ship was commanded by someone calling himself War Prime Kethix." Dr. Hayes looked up from her computer. Kethix was recently promoted after a successful attack on a civilian transport. Zephyrian culture rewards cruelty and sees mercy as weakness. The attack on your ship was probably filmed and will be used as propaganda to show their people how strong their military is. Sullivan nodded slowly. What is the current strength of the Zephyrian fleet? Approximately 800 warships spread across 12 star systems, Hayes replied. Their military doctrine relies on terror tactics and overwhelming force. They believe that if they are cruel enough, their enemies will surrender without fighting. Commander Phillips set a datapad in front of Sullivan. Sir, the President is asking for a response plan. The media is calling for immediate retaliation against Zephyrian military targets. Sullivan picked up the datapad but did not look at it. Instead, he stared at the star map on the wall that showed Zephyrian space marked in red. 12 systems, hundreds of worlds, millions of people who had chosen to follow leaders who murdered doctors and patients. The media wants us to attack their ships, Sullivan said thoughtfully. The politicians want us to destroy their bases. Both of those responses are exactly what the Zephyrians expect from us. General Davis leaned forward in his chair. What else can we do? We cannot let this attack go unanswered.
Oh.
Sullivan stood up and walked to the star map. He traced the borders of Zephyrian space with his finger, following the trade routes and communication lines that connected their worlds together. The Zephyrians think they understand how war works, he said quietly. They believe that the side with the most ships and the biggest guns always wins. They have never fought an enemy who thinks differently. Dr. Hayes closed her computer and looked at the Admiral with interest. She had seen him solve impossible problems before, but this seemed different. The Zephyrians were too strong to attack directly, and they were too scattered to defeat with conventional tactics. What are you thinking, sir? She asked. Sullivan turned around to face the council. His gray eyes were no longer cold. Now they burned with something that made even the bravest officers in the room feel uncomfortable. I am thinking that the Zephyrians have made a serious mistake, he said. They have shown us exactly who they are and what they believe in. Now we are going to show them what happens when you attack the healers. Captain Morgan felt something change in the room. The other officers were sitting up straighter and paying closer attention. Admiral Sullivan was no longer just angry about the attack on her ship. He was planning something that would change everything. Captain Morgan, Sullivan said, I want you to work with Dr. Hayes on a complete analysis of Zephyrian culture and psychology. I want to know how they think, what they fear, and what they need to survive. He turned to Commander Phillips. Ryan, I want detailed intelligence on every Zephyrian supply line, communication network, and manufacturing facility. Not their military targets, their civilian infrastructure. General Davis frowned. Sir, attacking civilian targets goes against everything we believe in. Sullivan shook his head. I am not talking about attacking civilians. I am talking about something much more elegant than that. The Zephyrians have built their empire on fear and violence. What happens to an empire like that when it can no longer inspire fear? 3 months had passed since Admiral Sullivan sat in that conference room and promised to show the Zephyrians what happened when they attacked healers. In all that time, not a single human warship had been seen anywhere near Zephyrian space. The news reporters were starting to ask why humanity was not fighting back. Some people thought Admiral Sullivan had gone soft, but War Prime Kethics was starting to worry about different things. Strange problems were happening all over the Zephyrian Empire, and nobody could figure out why. It started small, with cargo ships that got lost on routes they had traveled 1,000 times before. Then communication stations began having equipment failures for no reason that the technicians could find. On the mining world of Zephyr 7, the automated diggers suddenly stopped working properly. Chief Operator Vextel had been running mining operations for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The machines would dig in the wrong direction or break down just when they were needed most. The repair crews could not find anything wrong with them. The computers show everything is working fine, complained Technician Mordock as he climbed out of the engine compartment of digger number 43. But this machine keeps turning left when the navigation system tells it to go straight. Vextel looked at the diagnostic screen and shook his head. According to the computer, every system was functioning perfectly. But the digger had spent the morning digging a hole in the wrong place. It's costing them a full day of production. Similar problems were happening on other worlds throughout the Empire. On Zephyr 3, The food processing plants were producing meals. That tasted strange. Nothing dangerous, just slightly off in ways that made people feel sick to their stomachs after eating. On Zephyr, the water purification systems were working slower than usual. It's causing shortages in the big cities. Prime Kethix called a meeting of his senior officers to discuss these problems. They gathered in his flagship, the Dark Talon, which was orbiting the capital world of Prime Zephyr. The meeting room was painted black with red lighting that made everyone look angry even when they were not. What is the status of our investigation into these equipment failures? Kethix asked his intelligence chief, Subcommander Vekvar. Vekvar shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been a spy for 20 years and was good at finding hidden enemies, but this situation made no sense to him. We have found no evidence of sabotage, War Prime. Our security teams have checked every facility that has reported problems. No human ships have been detected in our space. No unauthorized personnel have been found on any of our worlds. And what is causing these failures? Kethix demanded. Admiral Zorthok, who commanded the Eastern Fleet, spoke up from across the table. Perhaps these are just normal equipment problems that happen sometimes. We may be seeing patterns where none exist. Vekvar shook his head. The statistical analysis does not support that theory. We are experiencing failure rates that are 3 times higher than normal across multiple star systems. Something is definitely happening, but we cannot identify the cause. What the Zephyrians did not know was that Lieutenant Ben Parker was sitting in a maintenance tunnel under their capital city at that very moment, installing a small device in their main power distribution system. The device was no bigger than his thumb and would not cause any immediate problems. Instead, it would slowly introduce tiny errors into the power flow that would get worse over time. Ben had been on Prime Zephyr for 2 weeks, working as a maintenance technician for the city power company. His fake identification papers were perfect, created by the best forgers in human intelligence. He looked enough like a Zephyrian to pass casual inspection, and his language skills were flawless after months of intensive training. The device Ben was installing would cause power fluctuations that would damage sensitive equipment very slowly. Computers would crash more often, manufacturing systems would produce defective parts, communication networks would have more static and interference. Each problem by itself would be small, but together they would create chaos. On the other side of the Zephyrian Empire, Sergeant Kate Williams was doing similar work on the industrial world of Zephyr 11. She had spent 3 days learning the layout of the main chemical processing plant that produced fuel for the Zephyrian fleet. Now she was in the computer control room, making tiny changes to the software that controlled the manufacturing process. Kate was not damaging anything or causing explosions. Instead, she was changing the chemical mixture ratios by tiny amounts. That would not be noticed right away. The fuel would still work, but it would burn less efficiently and cause more wear on ship engines. Over time, the entire Zephyrian fleet would need more maintenance and repairs. Commander Ryan Phillips was coordinating these operations from a hidden base in an asteroid field between human and Zephyrian space. The base was built inside a large asteroid that looked like any other piece of space rock.
Inside,
it had everything needed to support a small army of specialists who were working to tear apart the Zephyrian Empire one small piece at a time. Phillips looked at the status reports coming in from agents throughout Zephyrian space. Ben Parker had successfully installed 12 sabotage devices and was moving to his next target. Kate Williams had modified the software in 6 different manufacturing plants. 20 other agents were working on similar missions across the Empire.
Ow.
Are we doing on the communication disruption project? Phillips asked Dr. Emma Stone, who was in charge of electronic warfare. Dr. Stone looked up from her computer screens, which showed network diagrams of the Zephyrian communication system. We have successfully infiltrated 60% of their relay stations. Each station is now introducing small delays and errors into messages passing through it. The effect is cumulative, so messages traveling long distances are becoming increasingly unreliable. This was exactly what Admiral Sullivan had planned. Rather than attacking the Zephyrian military directly, he was attacking the invisible systems that kept their civilization running. Every empire needed reliable communication, efficient transportation, and working factories to survive. Without These things, even the strongest military, would eventually collapse. Back on the Dark Talon, War Prime Kethix was getting more reports of problems throughout his empire. A convoy of supply ships had gotten lost for 3 days because their navigation computers gave them wrong directions. A weapons factory on Zephyr 5 was producing blaster rifles that overheated after extended use. The main communication relay for the northern sector was down for maintenance again, the 3rd time this month. "This cannot be a coincidence," Kethix told his staff. "Someone is doing this to us, but we cannot see how." Admiral Zorthok was studying the reports with growing concern. His own ships were starting to experience more mechanical problems than usual. Engines were running hotter. Weapons systems needed more frequent calibration, and life support systems were working harder to maintain proper atmosphere. "Whatever is happening, it is affecting our military readiness. My fleet is operating at only 70% efficiency." Sub-Commander Vekvar had been thinking about the problem from a different angle. War Prime, what if our enemies are not using conventional sabotage? What if they have found a way to attack us that we do not recognize as an attack? Kethix considered this possibility. The humans were known for unusual tactics, but he could not imagine how they could cause so much damage without being detected. "What kind of attack are you thinking of?" "I do not know," Vekvar admitted. "But consider this. If I wanted to destroy an empire without fighting its army, I would attack the things that keep the empire running. Roads, communication networks, power systems, manufacturing. Make everything work a little bit worse until the whole system breaks down." The idea made Kethix angry because it suggested that humans were smarter than Zephyrians, something he refused to believe. "If the humans are behind this, we will find them and make them pay. Double the security patrols on all our worlds. Increase surveillance of all critical facilities. I want every human in our space arrested and questioned." But even as Kethix gave these orders, he knew they would not solve the real problem. If the humans were really responsible for the equipment failures, they were doing it in a way that left no evidence behind. Traditional security measures would not work against an enemy who could attack without being seen. Meanwhile, Admiral Sullivan was reading the progress reports from his hidden agents and allowing himself a small smile. The Zephyrian Empire was slowly choking on its own inefficiency, and they still did not understand what was happening to them. Supply lines were breaking down, manufacturing was producing defective goods, and communication between different parts of the empire was becoming unreliable. Most importantly, the Zephyrian military was starting to worry about problems at home instead of thinking about attacking other people. Ships that had been ready for combat were now tied up protecting supply convoys and investigating sabotage. Soldiers who had been planning invasions were now guarding power plants and communication stations. Dr. Alina Hayes brought Sullivan the latest intelligence analysis. "The Zephyrian economy is contracting by 2% per month," she reported. 6 months after the first sabotage operations began, the Zephyrian Empire was starting to tear itself apart from the inside. War Prime Kethix stood in his command center aboard the Dark Talon, staring at reports that made no sense. His empire was falling apart, but he could not figure out who was destroying it. The supply problems had gotten much worse. Cargo ships were arriving at the wrong planets or not arriving at all. Food shipments were spoiling during transport because the refrigeration systems kept breaking down. Military supplies were being delivered to civilian planets, while medical equipment ended up at military bases. But the strangest thing was what was happening to his commanders. Admiral Vextar, who controlled the Eastern Fleet, had been acting very suspicious lately. He was asking too many questions about fleet movements and seemed nervous during staff meetings. Admiral Korthok, who commanded the southern defenses, was also behaving oddly. He had been requesting additional security for his ships and had stopped sharing information with other commanders. What Kethix did not know was that both admirals were receiving carefully crafted messages that made them think the other was planning treason. The messages came through secure channels and looked completely official. They contained just enough real information mixed with lies to seem believable. Commander Ryan Phillips was orchestrating this psychological campaign from his hidden asteroid base. He had studied the personalities of every major Zephyrian leader and knew exactly what would make them paranoid and suspicious of each other. The key was to use their own fears against them. "How is the disinformation campaign proceeding?" Admiral Sullivan asked during their daily briefing call. Phillips looked at his status board, which showed the locations and activities of dozens of Zephyrian commanders. "Better than expected, sir. Admiral Vexstar is now convinced that Admiral Korthok is secretly working for us. Korthok thinks Vexstar is planning to overthrow the government. Both of them suspect War Prime Kethix of knowing about the other's treason, but doing nothing to stop it." Dr. Alina Hayes had spent months studying Zephyrian psychology and culture. She understood that they were naturally suspicious people who had built their entire society around competition and betrayal. In Zephyrian culture, anyone who showed weakness was quickly replaced by someone stronger. This made them excellent warriors, but terrible at working together during difficult times. "The beautiful thing about Zephyrian culture," Dr. Hayes explained, to her intelligence team, is that they expect betrayal from each other. When things go wrong, they automatically assume that someone in their own government is responsible. They cannot imagine that an outside enemy could be causing their problems without leaving evidence behind. On the planet Zephyr 4, regional governor Thakmer was dealing with riots in the capital city. The food distribution system had failed again, leaving thousands of people without adequate supplies. The governor blamed the military for not protecting the supply convoys. The military blamed the civilian government for poor planning. Both sides were angry and looking for someone to punish. Governor Thakmer received a message that appeared to come from War Prime Kethix himself. The message suggested that the military commanders on Zephyr 4 were deliberately veered, allowing the supply problems to continue in order to make the civilian government look bad. The message recommended that Thakmer remove several officers from their positions immediately. At the same time, Colonel Rextel, the senior military officer on Zephyr 4, received his own message that seemed to come from military headquarters. This message warned him that Governor Thakmer was planning to blame the military for all the planet's problems and was preparing to arrest several officers on false charges of sabotage. Both messages were forgeries. Created by specialist Linda Gray, who was working from a small communications station hidden in the mountains of Zephyr 4. Linda had been trained in electronic warfare and could create fake messages that were impossible to tell from real ones. She had been sending similar messages to leaders throughout the Zephyrian Empire for weeks. The result was exactly what Admiral Sullivan had hoped for. Instead of working together to solve their problems, Zephyrian leaders were fighting each other. Governor Thakmer arrested 3 military officers on charges of treason. Colonel Rextel responded by declaring martial law and arresting 2 civilian officials. Within days, Zephyr 4 was in complete chaos. War Prime Kethix was trying to deal with similar problems on a dozen different worlds. His commanders were sending him contradictory reports and asking for permission to arrest each other. The communication system was so unreliable that he could not be sure which messages were real and which might be fake. "War Prime," said Subcommander Thekvar during an emergency staff meeting, "I am receiving reports that Admiral Vexstar has been moving ships without authorization. Some of his vessels have left their assigned patrol routes and are heading toward the capital system." Kethix felt a cold fear in his stomach. If Vexstar was planning a military coup, it would explain many of the strange things that had been happening. What is Vexstar's explanation for these movements? He claims he is responding to intelligence reports of human infiltrators in the capital system, the Kavar replied. But those reports came from sources that Admiral Korthak says are unreliable. At that moment, Admiral Vexstar was sitting in his own command center, reading a message that seemed to prove Korthok was working with human spies. The message contained detailed information about Korthok's ship movements and suggested that he was planning to surrender several planets to human forces in exchange for personal protection. Vexstar had known Korthok for 10 years and had never trusted him completely. Korthok was ambitious and had always been jealous of other commanders who received more recognition than he did. The idea that he might betray the Empire to advance his own interests seemed completely believable. "Admiral," said his aide, Captain Morvex, "should we report this intelligence to War Prime Kethix?" Vexstar considered the question carefully. If Kethix was already aware of Korthok's treason and had chosen to do nothing about it, then reporting. It might put Vexstar in danger. If Kethix was not aware, then Vexstar would be the one to expose the plot, which would make him look good. Either way, he needed to be careful. Not yet, Vexstar decided. First, I want to gather more evidence. Move the 3rd and 7th fleets to positions where they can watch Korthak's ships. If he tries anything suspicious, we will be ready to stop him. Meanwhile, Admiral Korthak was making similar preparations based on his own fake intelligence reports. He was convinced that Vexstar was planning to attack the capital and overthrow the government. Korthak positioned his ships to intercept Vexstar's forces. Believing he was protecting the Empire from a traitor, the stage was set for a confrontation between 2 large fleets. Each believing the other was planning treason. Neither admiral realized that they were both being manipulated by an enemy who had never fired a shot at either of them. Admiral Sullivan watched the developing situation from his command center on New Geneva. The reports from his intelligence teams showed that the Zephyrian Empire was now consuming 70% of its resources, just trying to maintain internal security. Entire fleets were being used to watch other fleets instead of patrolling the borders or attacking enemy targets. The psychological phase is working better than we hoped, Dr. Hayes reported. Zephyrian commanders at every level are more worried about threats from their own people than from external enemies. Their military effectiveness has dropped by 60% in the last 2 months, said Captain Lisa Morgan, who had been working with the intelligence team since her rescue, studied the tactical displays with fascination. They are destroying themselves without any help from us. How is that possible? Because Admiral Sullivan explained, they built their entire culture around the idea that might makes right. When things go wrong, they automatically assume that someone stronger is taking power away from someone weaker. They cannot conceive of an enemy who attacks weakness itself rather than trying to prove superior strength. The final piece of Sullivan's psychological trap was about to spring. Specialist Linda Gray had prepared one last set of messages that would push the Zephyrian commanders past the point of no return. These messages would make it appear that Warprime Kethix himself was planning to eliminate both Vexstar and Korthak in order to consolidate his own power. When those messages were sent, the Zephyrian Empire would tear itself apart in a civil war that would leave it too weak to threaten anyone ever again. The species that had murdered doctors and patients in their hospital beds would learn what happened when they attacked the wrong enemy. Admiral Sullivan had promised to show the Zephyrians what humanity was capable of when they chose to fight, without mercy. But instead of using human weapons to destroy Zephyrian ships, he had used human intelligence to turn their own paranoia and ambition into weapons against themselves. The hospital ship massacre had been meant to demonstrate Zephyrian strength. Instead, it had triggered the destruction of everything they had built over centuries of conquest. In trying to prove they were the strongest species in the galaxy, the Zephyrians had awakened something far more dangerous than physical strength. They had awakened human creativity applied to the art of war. The final message was sent on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 years after the attack on the HMS Healing Light. Specialist Linda Gray pressed the transmission button from her hidden communication station and watched as the last piece of Admiral Sullivan's plan fell into place. The message appeared to come from Warprime Kethix himself, ordering the immediate arrest of Admiral Vexstar and Admiral Korthak for treason against the Empire. Both admirals received identical messages at the same time. Each message claimed that the other admiral had confessed to working with human spies and that Kethix was planning to execute them both to cover up his own involvement in the conspiracy. The messages were perfectly crafted to trigger the final explosion of paranoia that would destroy the Zephyrian Empire forever. Admiral Vexstar read his message twice before calling his senior officers to an emergency meeting. Kethix has decided to eliminate us, he told them grimly. He knows we have discovered his connection to the humans, and now he wants to silence us permanently. Captain Morvex, Vexstar's most trusted aide, studied the message with growing anger. "What are your orders, Admiral? We move against the capital immediately," Vexstar declared. "If we wait, we will all be dead by tomorrow. Signal the fleet to prepare for battle. We are going to save the Empire from a traitor." Exactly the same time, Admiral Korthak was making the same decision for the same reasons. His fleet began moving toward the capital system from the opposite direction. convinced that they were about to stop a military coup. Neither admiral knew that the other was also heading for a confrontation with Kethix. Warprime Kethix was in his command center when the reports started coming in. His communications officer, Lieutenant Morgok, turned from his console with confusion written across his face. Warprime, I am receiving movement reports from both the eastern and southern fleets. They appear to be converging on the capital system. What? Kethix demanded. I gave no such orders. Contact both admirals immediately and demand an explanation. But when Lieutenant Morgok tried to reach the two fleets, he found that their communication systems were experiencing technical difficulties. The messages he sent were either not received or came back garbled beyond recognition. Unknown to him, human agents had been sabotaging the communication relays for months, and now they were activating programs that would block all attempts at dialogue between the three forces. Dr. Alina Hayes watched the developing situation from the Intelligence Center on New Geneva. The tracking screens showed 3 separate Zephyrian fleets moving toward the same point in space, each believing the others were traitors. Admiral Sullivan, the fleets will reach the capital system in 6 hours. All communication between them has been successfully disrupted. Admiral Sullivan nodded with satisfaction. And our agents on the ground? All personnel have been evacuated to safe positions, Commander Phillips reported. Specialist Gray completed her mission and is now aboard a rescue ship heading for human space. The last of our sabotage teams extracted yesterday. Captain Lisa Morgan stood beside Admiral Sullivan, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching Zephyrian civil war. 2 years ago, she had commanded a hospital ship full of doctors and nurses who wanted only to heal the wounded. Now she was watching the empire that had murdered her crew destroy itself with paranoia and mistrust. How many people will die in this battle? She asked quietly. Sullivan considered the question carefully. Fewer than would have died if we had attacked them directly with military force, and far fewer than would have died if we had allowed them to continue their expansion across the galaxy. The first shots were fired at 14:30 ship time. Admiral Vextar's fleet encountered Admiral Korthek's ships near the outer edge of the capital system. Both admirals were convinced that the other was leading a rebellion against the government. Neither one attempted to communicate or negotiate. Vextar's flagship, the Iron Fist, opened fire on Korthek's command ship, the Blood Spear, with its main plasma cannons. Korthok responded immediately, and within minutes, both fleets were engaged in a massive battle that lit up space with weapons, fire, and explosions. Warprime. Kethix arrived at the battle scene 3 hours later with the capital fleet, expecting to restore order and arrest the rebels. Instead, he found 2 friendly fleets destroying each other, while his attempts to contact them were blocked by communication failures. When Kethix tried to intervene, both sides turned their weapons on his ships, believing he was part of the conspiracy against them. The Battle of Prime Zephyr lasted for 18 hours and ended with the destruction of 60% of the Zephyrian fleet. Admiral Vextar died when his flagship exploded after taking hits from 12 different ships. Admiral Korthok survived but was captured by Kethix's forces and later executed for treason. Warprime Kethix himself was killed when rebel officers on his own ship, convinced that he was working with human spies, mutinied and took control of the vessel. Dr. Hayes compiled the final report 3 days after the battle ended. The Zephyrian Empire has officially ceased to exist, she announced to Admiral Sullivan's staff. The remaining fleet commanders have declared independence for their individual star systems. There is no central government left, and the various worlds are now fighting each other over resources and territory. The news of the Empire's collapse spread throughout the galaxy within a week. The species that had terrorized their neighbors for decades had destroyed themselves in a single battle. Other civilizations watched in amazement as humanity achieved what had seemed impossible without losing a single ship in direct combat. Admiral Sullivan was summoned to appear before the Galactic Council on the neutral world of Harmony Station. Representatives from 47 different species gathered to hear his explanation of how humanity had accomplished such a complete victory over a superior enemy. Captain Morgan accompanied Sullivan to the council meeting, along with the other survivors of the hospital ship attack. She wore her dress uniform with pride, knowing that her crew's sacrifice had not been forgotten or ignored. The council chamber was a vast circular room with seats arranged in tiers around a central speaking platform. Admiral Sullivan walked to the center and faced the assembled delegates. His gray uniform simple and unadorned compared to the elaborate robes and decorations worn by the other representatives. Honored delegates, Sullivan began, humanity did not seek this conflict. We offered medical assistance to the wounded of all species, asking nothing in return except respect for the ancient traditions that protect healers in wartime. The Zephyrian Empire chose to answer our mercy with massacre. The Altarian delegate, whose people had been saved by the HMS Healing Light, stood to address the council. Admiral Sullivan, your victory over the Zephyrians has amazed us all. You destroyed an empire of 12 star systems without engaging their military in open battle. How was this accomplished? Sullivan looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had once dismissed humanity as young and inexperienced. We studied our enemy and learned their weaknesses. The Zephyrians built their empire on fear and conquest, but they also built it on systems that required trust and cooperation to function. We simply removed the trust and let their own nature do the rest. The crystalline representative, a being made of living mineral who communicated through light patterns, asked the question that many delegates were thinking. Does humanity possess the ability to destroy any civilization in this manner? We possess the ability to defend ourselves and our principles, Sullivan replied carefully. Any species that respects the basic rules of civilized warfare has nothing to fear from humanity. Those who choose to target healers, children, or other protected persons will discover that we can be very creative in our responses. The Council voted unanimously to adopt the Sullivan Doctrine, which declared that attacks on clearly marked medical vessels would be considered acts of war against all civilized species. The motion was proposed by the Altarian delegate and seconded by 3 former enemies of humanity. In the months that followed, the galaxy settled into a new pattern of peace. Medical ships from all species flew under joint protection agreements, their crews safe in the knowledge that any attack would trigger consequences that no aggressor could survive. Trade routes reopened as former Zephyrian worlds joined the Galactic community as independent members. Admiral Sullivan returned to New Geneva, where he established the Institute for Strategic Sciences. Officers from dozens of species came to study human methods of warfare, though the most advanced techniques remained classified. The Admiral's lectures were always full, but he was careful to teach principles rather than specific tactics. Captain Morgan took command of a new hospital ship, the HMS Second Chance, which was twice as large as the Healing Light and equipped with the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy. Her crew included doctors and nurses from 8 different species, all working together to heal the wounds left by centuries of conflict. On the anniversary of the hospital ship attack, Morgan held a memorial service for the 720 people who had died aboard the Healing Light. Representatives from every major species attended, including former Zephyrian worlds that were now trying to rebuild their civilization along more peaceful lines.